There are certain days parents never forget. The first day of school, the first driving lesson, the first time a child talks about the future as though it belongs to them. And then there are the extraordinary days, the days that justify years of sacrifice, years of planning, years of hope. For me, one of those days arrived when my son earned a full academic scholarship. I still remember the phone call, the excitement in his voice, the disbelief, the joy. After 18 years of hard work, dedication, and determination, opportunity had finally arrived, not just for him, for all of us, because families don't reach milestones alone. They arrive together, one sacrifice at a time, one decision at a time, one dream at a time. Marcus and I understood that better than anyone, or at least I thought we did. For nearly 2 decades, our lives revolved around preparation for possibilities, preparation for opportunities, preparation for a future we hoped would be larger than our own. Every birthday check from grandparents went into savings. Every unexpected tax refund went into savings. Every extra dollar found a purpose, a destination, a future. The education account became a symbol of that commitment, not just money, love, discipline, hope. The balance represented thousands of small choices made over many years, vacations postponed, luxury skipped, budgets carefully managed. Every sacrifice connected to a simple belief: education opens doors, and we wanted every door available to our son. The scholarship felt like validation, proof that the effort mattered, proof that he had earned something extraordinary. Life felt hopeful, stable, predictable, which is probably why what happened next felt so impossible, because disasters rarely announce themselves dramatically. Sometimes they arrive disguised as ordinary mornings. Mine arrived on a Tuesday, a completely forgettable Tuesday. At least it started that way. The weather was pleasant, work was routine, nothing seemed unusual. Around mid-morning, I logged into our education account, a habit more than a necessity. I checked balances occasionally, reviewed statements, verified information. Simple financial housekeeping, the sort of thing responsible adults do without thinking. That morning, I almost didn't log in. Almost. A small decision, one click, one ordinary action, the kind that changes lives without warning. The account loaded. I glanced at the balance, then frowned. Something looked wrong, very wrong. For a moment, I assumed it was a technical error, a bank issue, a system malfunction, data problem, any explanation except the obvious one, because the obvious explanation was terrifying. I opened transaction records. The decision felt automatic, instinctive, and within seconds, my entire world changed. Withdrawals, multiple withdrawals, large withdrawals, spread across months, then years. My heart began pounding, loudly, painfully, because suddenly I wasn't looking at an error. I was looking at a pattern, a very deliberate pattern. One transaction after another, one withdrawal after another, money leaving quietly, steadily, relentlessly. The account hadn't been emptied overnight. It had been drained gradually, carefully, patiently, like someone hoping nobody would notice. The realization made me physically ill. I reviewed dates, amounts, timelines, again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood, hoping logic would eventually appear. It didn't. The evidence remained exactly where it was, clear, unmistakable, terrifying. Then I saw something that made everything worse. The authorization records. The withdrawals weren't random. They weren't fraudulent. They weren't external. They came from inside the account. Authorized access, authorized transfers, authorized decisions. My hands began shaking because only 2 people possessed that level of access, me and Marcus. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, the silence louder. I sat motionless for several minutes, unable to think clearly, unable to breathe normally, unable to understand how reality had changed so quickly. Eventually, I did what anyone would do. I called Marcus, straight to voicemail. I called again, no answer. Again, nothing. Each unanswered call intensified the dread, because deep down, somewhere beneath the confusion, a horrifying possibility had already begun forming, a possibility I desperately wanted to reject, yet couldn't. By the time lunchtime arrived, I wasn't searching for technical explanations. I was searching transaction histories, account records, authorization logs, anything capable of explaining what happened. Every answer pointed in the same direction, the same person, the same access point, the same name. Marcus. The realization felt impossible, not because the evidence was unclear, because the evidence was too clear. Marcus wasn't merely connected to the missing money. Marcus had taken it. The man who spent 18 years talking about our son's future, the man who celebrated the scholarship, the man who promised we'd always protect our child, that man appeared throughout every transaction record, again and again and again. By the time I heard the front door open that evening, I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't searching for explanations. I was waiting for one. And as Marcus walked into the house carrying his briefcase, completely unaware of what I'd discovered, I realized something. The balance wasn't the only thing that had disappeared, because whatever explanation he offered next would determine whether trust still existed too. The front door closed behind Marcus with an ordinary sound, a familiar sound, the kind I'd heard thousands of times over the years. Normally, it brought comfort, routine, predictability. That evening, it brought something else, dread. Marcus walked into the kitchen carrying his briefcase, loosening his tie, looking exactly the same as he had the day before and the day before that, which somehow made everything worse because nothing about him appeared different. Nothing suggested the secret I had spent the entire day uncovering. Nothing suggested that more than $200,000 had vanished from our son's future. He smiled when he saw me, a normal smile, a casual smile, the smile of someone expecting an ordinary evening. Then he noticed my expression, and the smile disappeared immediately. Not because he knew why, because after 20 years of marriage, he knew something was wrong. What happened? The question sounded genuine, concerned, almost innocent. The contrast made my stomach turn. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid a printed account statement across the table. The paper stopped in front of him. Marcus looked down, and in that instant, everything changed. I saw it. The exact moment recognition arrived, the exact moment he understood. His face lost color, his shoulders stiffened, his eyes fixed on the statement. For several seconds he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. The reaction told me more than words ever could, because innocent people react differently. They ask questions, express confusion, look for explanations. Marcus did none of those things. He simply stared and looked terrified. The realization broke something inside me, because before that moment, a small part of me still hoped, still searched for another explanation, a misunderstanding, a mistake, anything. Now there was only certainty. I spoke quietly, almost calmly. "Where is it?" Marcus remained motionless. The silence stretched, long enough to become an answer itself. Then finally he sat down, slowly, carefully, like a man preparing for impact. I repeated the question, "Where is the money?" This time he looked up, and what I saw in his eyes frightened me. Not anger, not defensiveness, fear, Real fear, the kind that exists when someone realizes a secret can no longer survive. For a moment, I thought he might deny everything, claim fraud, claim theft, claim confusion. Instead, he whispered, "I can explain." The sentence landed badly, very badly, because nobody says "I can explain" when there's a harmless explanation. They say it when damage already exists. I shook my head. No. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. No more vague answers. I pointed toward the statement. "Tell me where the money went." Marcus closed his eyes, and for several seconds the room remained silent. The silence felt enormous, heavy, unavoidable. Then he said two words that changed everything. "I lost it." The sentence barely registered at first. Lost it. My mind rejected the phrase immediately, because money like that doesn't simply get lost, not accidentally, not gradually, not over years. The wording made no sense, which is exactly why it terrified me. I stared at him, waiting, knowing there was more. There had to be more. And there was. A lot more. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. The gesture looked exhausted, defeated. Then he finally said the word that instantly connected every missing piece. Gambling. The room seemed to tilt, not physically, emotionally, because suddenly dozens of memories rearranged themselves. Business trips, casino conferences, weekend absences, strange financial stress, unexplained tension, details that never quite fit. Now they did, painfully, perfectly. For several seconds, I couldn't speak, because gambling wasn't simply an explanation. It was a doorway leading toward years of hidden decisions, years of hidden behavior, years of hidden risk. The realization was overwhelming. Eventually, I found my voice. "How long?" The question sounded distant, almost detached. Marcus answered immediately, which somehow made it worse. "About 6 years. 6 years. Nearly a third of our son's life. 6 years of secrecy. 6 years of deception. 6 years of choices." I stared at him, unable to reconcile the man sitting across from me with the person I thought I knew. Because addiction explained behavior, it didn't erase responsibility, and responsibility was sitting directly in front of me. Marcus continued speaking, the words emerging faster now, as though the truth had finally broken through. It started small. A pause. Sports betting. Another pause. Then casinos. His voice cracked slightly. Then online gambling. I listened without interrupting, not because I wanted details, because I needed reality, no matter how painful. Marcus looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "I thought I could control it." The sentence sounded familiar, almost rehearsed, not because he'd practiced it for me, because he probably repeated it to himself thousands of times. The lie addicts tell themselves before consequences arrive. I can control it. I can stop. I can fix it. I can win it back. The pattern felt tragically predictable and devastatingly expensive. Eventually, I asked the question I feared most, the question sitting beneath every other question. "Did you take it from our son's account?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. The hesitation lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. Then, "Yes." The word landed with brutal simplicity. No excuses, no explanations, no ambiguity, just truth. Finally, painfully, truth. And sitting there across from the man I'd trusted for decades, I realized something horrifying. The missing money wasn't the worst part, not even close, because money can be replaced, accounts can be rebuilt, losses can be recovered. What Marcus had taken from us was something much harder to restore, trust, and I was beginning to understand just how much of it was gone. Trust.
The words stayed with me long after Marcus stopped speaking, because suddenly I understood something. The missing money wasn't a single decision. It wasn't one bad night, one desperate moment, one terrible mistake. It was thousands of decisions, thousands. Every withdrawal required a choice. Every transfer required authorization. Every month required another opportunity to stop. And every month, Marcus chose not to. That realization hurt more than I expected, because addiction explained part of the story, but not all of it. The account statement remained between us, silent, unforgiving, a paper trail documenting years of deception. I looked down at the transactions again. The dates felt different now, more personal, more painful. Each withdrawal represented a moment when Marcus looked at our son's future and decided to gamble with it. The thought made my chest tighten. I forced myself to ask the next question. When did you first take money from the account? Marcus swallowed hard, then answered, about 4 years ago. 4 years. The number immediately triggered memories. Family vacations, graduation ceremonies, holiday dinners, ordinary life, all unfolding while this secret grew quietly in the background. The contrast felt surreal, because while I planned for college applications, Marcus was draining college savings. While I celebrated academic achievements, he was risking the money intended to support them. The betrayal ran deeper than finances, much deeper. I stared at him, trying to understand, trying to find logic, trying to locate the moment where everything changed. Eventually, I asked, why? The question seemed obvious, yet important, because none of this made sense, not emotionally, not practically, not morally. Marcus closed his eyes, then spoke softly. At first, I thought I could replace it. There it was, the sentence, the justification, the dangerous promise that transforms bad decisions into catastrophes. I'll replace it. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. The words sounded ridiculous now, yet I could hear how convincing they might have felt in the beginning, especially to someone desperate, especially to someone losing control. Marcus continued, I lost money. A pause. Then I tried to win it back. Another pause. I lost more. His voice grew quieter. So I took a little from the account. The confession felt like a punch to the stomach, not because I didn't already know, because hearing the sequence made it real. A little became more became much more, and eventually an entire future sat at a gambling table. The realization was horrifying. I looked at the transaction history again. The pattern suddenly made sense. Small withdrawals initially, then larger ones, then larger still. The progression mirrored addiction itself. Escalation, desperation, collapse. Everything connected, painfully, perfectly. How much? The question came out automatically. Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the statement, at the evidence, at the years. Then finally, almost all of it. The room felt colder, smaller, harder to breathe inside, because hearing the number spoken aloud changed something. The account wasn't damaged. It wasn't reduced. It was devastated. Nearly everything was gone. 18 years of planning, 18 years of sacrifice, nearly gone. The thought was almost unbearable. Then another realization appeared, one even worse. I looked directly at him. Did you ever plan to tell me? The question lingered. Marcus immediately looked away. The reaction answered everything. Yet eventually he spoke. I wanted to. The sentence sounded weak, fragile, unconvincing, because wanting to tell the truth and actually telling it are very different things. Years different. $200,000 different. The distinction mattered. A lot. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was exhausted, the sort of silence that follows devastation. Then I asked the question that had been growing steadily since the conversation began, the question that mattered most. Does our son know? Marcus answered immediately, no. The speed of the response surprised me, perhaps because it was the first answer that contained certainty, absolute certainty, no hesitation, no ambiguity, no delay. The realization hit me hard, because somewhere in the house, our son still believed his future was secure, still believed the sacrifices made for him remained intact, still believed his parents were protecting him. The innocence broke my heart. Marcus noticed my expression, and for the first time that evening, tears appeared in his eyes. Real tears, not theatrical, not defensive, real. I never wanted this. The sentence emerged quietly, broken, human, and for a brief moment I saw something important. Marcus wasn't a villain enjoying destruction. He was a man consumed by a problem he refused to confront. The distinction mattered, but not enough, not nearly enough, because intentions don't restore accounts, intentions don't rebuild trust, intentions don't pay tuition. Consequences exist regardless. The realization settled heavily over both of us. Then I asked the question neither of us wanted to face, the practical question, the future question, the question sitting beneath everything else. How are we going to pay for college? The room immediately became silent again. Marcus couldn't answer, because there wasn't an answer. Not yet. Tuition covered the scholarship. That part was true, but tuition wasn't everything. Housing, books, fees, transportation, living expenses. The education fund existed for a very important reason, and now it was gone. The reality seemed impossible, yet there it was, waiting, demanding attention, demanding solutions. Finally, Marcus whispered, "I don't know." The honesty was brutal, but at least it was honest. And sitting there staring at the account statement, I realized something. For years, Marcus had been trying to win back what he lost. Now I would have to rebuild what he destroyed. Not because it was fair, not because it was easy, because our son deserved better than the consequences of someone else's addiction. And whether Marcus understood that or not, I already did. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry, although I was. Not because I was devastated, although I was that too. I couldn't sleep because my mind refused to stop calculating. Numbers, dates, deadlines, costs, possibilities. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the account balance, the nearly empty account, the years of sacrifice reduced to a number I could barely look at. Around 3 a.m, I gave up entirely. I walked into the kitchen, made coffee, and opened my laptop. If Marcus couldn't tell me how we were going to fix this, I would figure it out myself. The determination surprised me, not because I lacked it, because it arrived so quickly. Perhaps that's what parenthood does. When panic stops helping, action begins. At least it did for me. I started reviewing college costs, housing estimates, meal plans, book expenses, transportation, emergency funds. The scholarship covered a tremendous amount, a blessing, an extraordinary blessing, yet significant expenses remained. Expenses we'd planned to cover with the education fund, the same fund Marcus had emptied. The reality felt overwhelming, but numbers have one advantage over emotions. They can be analyzed, broken apart, rebuilt. The process gave me something I desperately needed: focus. By sunrise, I had pages of notes, potential solutions, possible strategies, contingency plans. Nothing perfect, nothing easy, but possibilities, and possibilities felt better than despair, much better. Marcus entered the kitchen around 7. He looked exhausted, older somehow, as though the previous evening had added years to his face. Part of me felt sorry for him.
Another part refused. Both emotions existed simultaneously. Neither canceled the other. He sat across from me, silent. The account statements remained on the table, a reminder neither of us needed. Eventually he spoke. "I'll fix it." The sentence landed badly, very badly, because I'd heard versions of that promise before, not directly, but indirectly. Every withdrawal represented that promise. Every transfer represented that promise. Every gamble represented that promise. "I'll fix it. I'll replace it. I'll win it back." The words had already caused enough damage. I looked at him calmly. "No." He blinked, confused. "No?" I shook my head. "You're not fixing this with gambling." The statement felt necessary, essential, because addiction thrives on one particular fantasy, the fantasy that the next win solves everything, the fantasy that recovery arrives through the same mechanism that created destruction. I wasn't interested in fantasies anymore. I was interested in reality. Marcus stared at the table, then nodded slowly. The realization seemed painful, yet genuine. For the first time, he appeared to understand that there wasn't a dramatic solution waiting somewhere. No jackpot, no miracle, no lucky break. Only consequences, only work, only time. The truth often looks disappointingly ordinary. That doesn't make it less powerful. By mid-morning, another problem emerged, a much harder one. Our son. The question had been sitting quietly in the background all night, waiting, patiently, unavoidable. When do we tell him? How do we tell him? What do we tell him? The responsibility felt enormous because the truth belonged to him. The money was intended for him. The future affected him. Yet I hated the idea of burdening him with something he didn't create. The contradiction felt impossible. Marcus seemed to understand because he asked the same question I was asking myself. Should we tell him now? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I considered it carefully. The easy answer would have been yes, immediate honesty, immediate disclosure. Yet life isn't always that simple. Our son had spent years working toward his goals, years earning opportunities, years building confidence. I wasn't willing to let Marcus's addiction steal that too. Eventually, I answered, "We tell him the truth." Marcus nodded, relieved perhaps. Then I continued, "But first, we need a plan." His expression changed. Confusion, then understanding, because truth without solutions can become another burden, and I wasn't interested in creating unnecessary burdens, especially for our son. Not now, not ever. The next several days became a blur. Meetings, phone calls, financial reviews, legal consultations, account investigations. I learned more about our finances in 1 week than I had in the previous 5 years, not because information was unavailable, because I suddenly understood the cost of not paying attention. The realization was uncomfortable, yet valuable, very valuable. The deeper I looked, the clearer things became. The gambling losses were extensive, worse than I imagined. Credit cards, personal loans, hidden debt. The education fund wasn't the only casualty. It was simply the largest, the most painful, the most unforgivable. Each discovery hurt, yet strangely, the pain also strengthened my resolve because uncertainty was disappearing, reality was becoming visible, and visible problems can be addressed, eventually, one step at a time. Late one evening, after another exhausting day of financial meetings, I found myself standing outside my son's bedroom. The door was slightly open. Inside, he sat at his desk, studying, planning, working toward a future he still believed existed exactly as promised. The sight nearly broke me, because he trusted us completely, the way children trust parents, the way they should. And suddenly, I understood something important. Marcus hadn't merely gambled money, he had gambled responsibility, trust, security, the invisible things parents are supposed to protect. The realization crystallized everything. Standing there in the hallway, watching my son prepare for a future we'd promised to support, I made a decision. No matter how long it took, no matter how difficult it became, no matter how many sacrifices were required, I would rebuild what was lost. Maybe not immediately, maybe not perfectly, but completely. Because our son had earned his opportunity, and I refused to let someone else's addiction become the defining story of his future. That story belonged to him, not to Marcus, and certainly not to gambling. The conversation with our son happened 3 weeks later, 3 of the longest weeks of my life. Not because we were hiding the truth, because we were preparing for it. Preparing emotionally, preparing financially, preparing practically. I wanted answers before questions arrived. I wanted options before fears appeared. Most importantly, I wanted him to understand one thing. His future was not disappearing, no matter what happened, no matter what it cost. That promise mattered to me more than anything. During those 3 weeks, Marcus began attending addiction counseling. The decision wasn't dramatic. There were no emotional speeches, no life-changing revelations, just appointments, meetings, work. Recovery often looks far less cinematic than people imagine. It looks repetitive, difficult, uncomfortable, and very ordinary, at least in the beginning. I respected the effort, but respect wasn't trust. Not yet. Perhaps not for a long time. The distinction mattered a great deal. One evening, we finally sat down together in the living room. The atmosphere felt strange immediately. Children notice things, even grown children. They recognize tension, silence, concern, long before anyone explains it. Our son looked from me to Marcus, then back again. His expression suggested he already knew something was wrong, not the details, the direction. I understood that feeling. Instinct often arrives before information. I took a deep breath, then began. The words felt heavy, carefully chosen, necessary. I explained the missing money, the education account, the gambling addiction, the losses, the recovery efforts, the plans moving forward. I told the truth, all of it, without excuses, without minimizing, without protecting Marcus from consequences. Some realities deserve clarity. This was one of them. The room remained silent after I finished, very silent. Our son didn't speak immediately, didn't react dramatically, didn't shout, didn't cry. He simply sat there, processing. The reaction somehow felt more painful than anger would have, because silence leaves room for realization, and realization can be devastating. Eventually, he looked directly at Marcus. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then came the question, a simple question, one that cut deeper than any accusation. Why didn't you ask for help? The room became even quieter because the question was reasonable, logical, human, and impossible to answer well. Marcus stared at the floor, then answered honestly, I was ashamed. The response surprised me, not because it was wrong, because it was true. Addiction survives in secrecy. Shame protects secrecy. The cycle feeds itself. The insight didn't excuse anything, yet it explained more than I expected. Our son nodded slowly, as though he understood, at least intellectually. Then he asked another question, one that hurt even more. Did you think about me when you took the money? Marcus physically flinched. The reaction was immediate, uncontrolled, painful. I watched tears fill his eyes, real tears, the kind that arrive when truth finally reaches places denial couldn't protect. Every time, his voice cracked, I thought about you every single time. The answer sounded awful because it was awful, not heartless, tragic, because it revealed the true nature of addiction. Knowing something is wrong doesn't necessarily stop it. Sometimes it simply increases the guilt afterward. The realization hung heavily over the room. Our son leaned back, silent again, thinking, processing, grieving, because that's what this was, a form of grief, the loss of certainty, the loss of trust, the loss of a version of his father that no longer existed. Eventually, he looked at me, not Marcus, me, and asked, "Are we okay?" The question nearly broke my heart because despite everything, that remained his concern, not anger, not blame, the future, security, stability, the things parents are supposed to provide. I answered immediately, yes, no hesitation, no uncertainty, yes, because by then I had already made that decision, before the conversation, before the disclosures, before the tears. We were going to be okay. The path might look different, the sacrifices might increase, the timeline might change, but we were going to be okay. The certainty in my voice seemed to help a little, not enough to erase the damage, enough to create breathing room, hope, possibility. The conversation continued for hours. Questions, answers, silences, more questions. Some practical, some emotional, some impossible. By the end, everyone looked exhausted, emotionally exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that follows life-altering truth. As our son stood to leave the room, he paused beside Marcus. For a moment, I thought he might say something angry, something unforgiving. Instead, he quietly said, "Get help," then walked away. The simplicity of the statement stunned me. No lecture, no cruelty, no dramatic confrontation, just accountability and expectation. Perhaps that was harder to hear. After he left, Marcus sat motionless for a long time, staring at nothing, thinking. Finally, he whispered, "I don't deserve him." The sentence lingered, painful, honest, perhaps the most honest thing he'd said in years. I didn't respond, because some statements don't require responses, only reflection. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I reviewed financial plans again. Scholarships, work-study programs, saving strategies, additional income possibilities. The list continued growing, not because I enjoyed it, because rebuilding requires action, and action was the only thing keeping me moving forward. As I worked through numbers and timelines, a realization settled over me. The account balance wasn't what defined our family, never had been. Character did, choices did, perseverance did. Those things still existed, damaged perhaps, but not destroyed. And for the first time since discovering the missing money, I felt something unexpected. Not peace, not yet, something smaller, something quieter. Hope. Because while Marcus had spent years gambling on luck, I was beginning to bet on something far more reliable, work. And work, unlike gambling, had a history of paying off. Hope is a fragile thing, especially after betrayal. It doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces, small pieces, quiet pieces, the kind that are easy to overlook. Yet over time, those pieces begin forming something stronger, something capable of carrying you forward. The months after our conversation with our son followed that pattern, slowly, imperfectly, steadily. Life did not magically improve. Recovery rarely works that way. There were still financial problems, still difficult conversations, still consequences waiting around every corner. The difference was that everything now existed in the open. No more secrets, no more hidden withdrawals, no more mysterious account activity. Reality had finally entered the room. Painful reality, but reality nonetheless. And reality is easier to manage than deception. Marcus attended counseling every week, then twice a week. Eventually, he joined a support group. The commitment appeared genuine, at least from the outside. I noticed changes, subtle changes, more honesty, more accountability, more willingness to discuss uncomfortable topics. The effort mattered, yet trust remained complicated, because trust doesn't return simply because someone apologizes. It returns through consistency, over time, a great deal of time. Marcus seemed to understand that, which was fortunate, because I wasn't interested in promises anymore, only actions. One afternoon, about 4 months after discovering the missing money, I received a call from the university's financial aid office. Normally, such calls create anxiety. That day was different. The representative reviewed scholarship opportunities, supplemental grants, academic awards, programs we hadn't previously considered. By the end of the conversation, I felt something unfamiliar, relief. Not complete relief, partial relief, enough to matter. The scholarship covered more than we initially realized. Additional opportunities existed. Paths forward were appearing. The realization felt encouraging, very encouraging. That evening, I shared the information with our son. His reaction surprised me, not because he was excited, because he was calm, far calmer than I would have been at his age. He listened carefully, asked practical questions, reviewed details, then simply said, "We'll figure it out." The statement sounded so familiar that it made me smile, because it was exactly what I'd been telling myself for months. We'll figure it out. Not because solutions were obvious, because determination existed, and determination often matters more. The conversation reminded me how much he'd grown, how much resilience he possessed, how much strength existed beneath the disappointment. The realization filled me with pride and sadness, both emotions, simultaneously, a recurring theme that year. As college approached, preparations intensified. Housing applications, course registration, orientation events, supply lists, the ordinary rituals of transition. Parents across the country were experiencing the same milestones, yet for us, every milestone carried additional meaning, because each one represented something Marcus almost jeopardized. The thought never completely disappeared, nor should it have. Consequences deserve remembrance, at least for a while. One evening, while organizing paperwork, I discovered an old photograph. Our son at age 10, standing beside a science fair project, grinning proudly. Marcus stood next to him, smiling too. The sight stopped me, because photographs preserve moments, not entire stories. Looking at the image, nobody would guess what lay ahead. Nobody would predict addiction, or missing money, or shattered trust. The picture captured a different reality, a simpler one. For a moment, grief returned, not for the money, for the years, the lost honesty, the unnecessary deception, the version of our family that might have existed if Marcus had asked for help sooner. The thought hurt, yet surprisingly it didn't consume me. Perhaps because I was beginning to understand something. Regret can explain the past. It cannot rebuild the future. Only action can do that. The insight became increasingly important, especially as college move-in day approached. The day arrived faster than expected. Most major life events do. One moment they're distant, the next they're standing in your driveway, waiting, demanding attention. Our car was packed with boxes, clothes, books, supplies, everything necessary for a new chapter. The drive to campus felt emotional, exciting, bittersweet, hopeful, the familiar mixture parents experience when children become adults. Marcus sat quietly for most of the trip, more reflective than usual. I understood why. He understood the significance of the moment, perhaps more than anyone, because unlike most parents, he knew how close he came to losing it, not physically, emotionally. The distinction mattered. When we finally arrived, the campus buzzed with activity, families everywhere, students carrying boxes, volunteers directing traffic. The atmosphere radiated possibility. The energy was contagious. For a few hours, we focused entirely on practical things, unpacking, organizing, settling in. Normal activities, wonderfully normal activities. Then came the goodbye, the moment every parent anticipates and dreads. Our son hugged me first, tightly, then Marcus. The embrace lasted longer than expected, long enough to communicate something words couldn't. Forgiveness, perhaps, or the beginning of it. The sight affected me deeply, because forgiveness isn't guaranteed, especially after betrayal. It must be earned, patiently, consistently, over time. As we walked back toward the parking lot, Marcus remained silent. Finally, halfway across campus, he spoke. I almost took this from him. The sentence emerged quietly, barely above a whisper. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I didn't hear defensiveness, or excuses, or shame. I heard understanding, real understanding, the kind that arrives only after consequences become visible, the kind that cannot be faked. And standing there on a college campus filled with opportunity, I realized something. Recovery wasn't only about stopping gambling. It was about learning to see clearly again. The damage, the people, the consequences, the truth. Marcus was finally beginning to see. The question now was whether that understanding had arrived in time to save what mattered most.
The house felt different after our son left for college. Quieter. Not empty, just different. Parents often describe it as an adjustment, a transition, a new chapter. All of those descriptions are accurate, yet none fully capture the experience. Because when a child leaves home, routines leave with them. The small daily moments, the familiar sounds, the ordinary interactions you barely notice until they're gone. The silence forced reflection, and reflection wasn't always comfortable, especially that year. For me, the quiet created space, space to think, space to heal, space to examine everything that had happened. For Marcus, it seemed to do the same. The difference was that his reflection carried an additional burden, responsibility, the kind that cannot be delegated or avoided or explained away. Several months into our son's first semester, Marcus reached an important milestone, 1 year without gambling. The date arrived quietly, no celebration, no party, no dramatic announcement, just a date on a calendar. Yet I could tell it mattered deeply to him, because recovery isn't measured only in days, it's measured in choices, thousands of small choices repeated consistently. The effort deserved recognition, even if trust remained complicated. That evening, Marcus mentioned the anniversary during dinner, not proudly, not boastfully, simply as a fact. A year today. I nodded. The response felt appropriate, because recovery deserved acknowledgement, but consequences still existed. Both truths could coexist, and often did. Marcus seemed to understand, which was another sign of growth. A year earlier, he would have wanted immediate forgiveness, immediate reassurance.
Now he appeared content simply doing the work. The distinction mattered more than he probably realized. A few weeks later, another unexpected development occurred. Our son called one evening, not about finances, not about grades, not about problems, about an internship opportunity, a remarkable opportunity, competitive, prestigious, the sort of achievement that opens doors. As he described the program, excitement filled his voice, the same excitement I'd heard years earlier when he earned the scholarship. Listening to him, I felt overwhelming pride. Not because everything had gone perfectly, because it hadn't, because despite everything, he continued moving forward. The realization felt profound. After the call ended, I sat quietly for several minutes, thinking, reflecting, feeling grateful. Marcus sat nearby. Eventually he asked, "How's he doing?" The question surprised me, not because he didn't care, because there was vulnerability in it, a subtle fear, the fear that some damage remains permanent. I understood, perhaps better than he expected. "He's doing well." Marcus nodded slowly, relief visible in his expression. Then he looked away, toward the window, toward the darkness outside, and quietly said, "I don't think I'll ever forgive myself." The statement lingered, heavy, honest, painful. I considered responding immediately, then decided against it, because self-forgiveness is complicated, especially when real harm exists, especially when consequences affect people you love. Eventually, I answered, "That's not the goal." Marcus looked at me, confused, waiting. "The goal is making sure it never happens again." The room became silent, not uncomfortable, reflective, because recovery isn't about erasing the past. It isn't about pretending damage never occurred. It's about preventing new damage. The distinction felt important, very important. Marcus seemed to absorb the idea carefully, thoughtfully, as though examining it from different angles. Then he nodded, slowly, understanding. The conversation ended there, yet the thought remained, for both of us. Months passed, then another year. Life gradually became less defined by the crisis, not because the crisis disappeared, because healing creates perspective. The missing money remained part of our history. It simply stopped being the center of it. That shift felt significant, a sign that recovery extended beyond finances, beyond gambling, beyond trust, into identity itself. One spring afternoon, our son returned home during a school break. Older, more confident, more independent. The transformation seemed impossible and obvious simultaneously, the contradiction parents know well. At dinner, he talked about classes, professors, internships, future plans, possibilities. The conversation flowed easily, naturally, and as I listened, another realization settled over me. Marcus had tried to gamble away a future, yet somehow the future survived, not untouched, not unchanged, but intact. The thought felt powerful, because resilience isn't the absence of hardship, it's the ability to continue despite hardship. Our son embodied that truth beautifully. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I found myself reviewing old account statements. Not intentionally. I was organizing files, cleaning drawers, sorting paperwork. The documents appeared unexpectedly, the same statements that once made me physically sick, the same statements that revealed everything. For a moment, I considered throwing them away, then paused, because those papers represented more than loss. They represented a turning point. The moment illusion ended, the moment truth arrived, the moment rebuilding began. Without that discovery, the damage would have continued. The realization changed how I viewed them. Not evidence of destruction, evidence of awakening. The distinction mattered. A lot. I placed the statements back into the folder, carefully, deliberately, then returned them to storage. Not because I wanted to revisit the pain, because some reminders serve a purpose. They remind us how far we've come, how much we've learned, how much we've survived. And standing there in the quiet house, I realized something. The gambling had stolen money. It had stolen trust. It had stolen peace, for a while, but it hadn't stolen our future. And that, more than anything else, felt like a victory. By the time our son entered his final year of college, life looked very different. Not perfect, not untouched, but stable. And after everything we'd been through, stability felt like a gift. The financial rebuilding had taken years, years of discipline, years of careful planning, years of saying no to things we once would have considered routine. Vacations became shorter, budgets became tighter, spending became intentional. Every extra dollar found a purpose, a familiar purpose, the same purpose it had always been meant to serve: opportunity. The irony wasn't lost on me. In some ways, we had returned to the beginning, back to careful choices, back to sacrifice, back to planning. The difference was perspective. This time, I understood exactly how fragile security could be and exactly how important vigilance was. The lessons were expensive, painfully expensive, yet lessons nonetheless. One afternoon, I received an email from the university, a routine message. At least it appeared routine at first. Graduation information, ceremony details, guest tickets, logistics, ordinary administrative information. Yet reading it triggered something emotional, because suddenly the future wasn't theoretical anymore. Graduation was real. Close, visible. After years of work, our son was approaching the finish line. The realization filled me with pride and relief, a tremendous amount of relief. That evening, I forwarded the information to Marcus. A few minutes later, my phone rang. His voice sounded different, more emotional than usual. "You got the graduation email?" I smiled. "Yes." Silence followed. Not awkward silence, meaningful silence. Then, "I wasn't sure we'd get here." The honesty caught me off guard, because beneath the statement existed another one, a harder one, a more painful one. I wasn't sure I deserved to get here. The unspoken meaning hung between us. Neither of us acknowledged it directly. We didn't need to. Some truths speak loudly without words. Over the next several weeks, graduation preparations intensified. Hotel reservations, travel arrangements, family schedules, the ordinary chaos accompanying important milestones. The process felt strangely familiar, much like preparing for college itself. Only this time, the destination was different. Not a beginning, a completion, a reward, a culmination. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, especially considering how close we came to losing it. One weekend, while organizing travel plans, I stumbled across an old college savings brochure, the kind financial institutions mail endlessly. Normally, I would have thrown it away. Instead, I found myself studying it. The smiling students, the optimistic language, the promises about planning for the future. Years earlier, the brochure would have represented possibility. Later, it would have represented pain. Now, it represented something else, perspective, because the future had never truly depended on the account. The account helped, the account mattered, but determination mattered more. Character mattered more. Perseverance mattered more. The realization felt liberating. Money creates opportunities. People decide what to do with them. Our son had proven that repeatedly. The insight stayed with me, growing stronger as graduation approached. Around that same time, Marcus reached another milestone: 3 years without gambling. 3 years. The number felt significant, not because it erased the past, nothing could do that, because it represented consistency, a daily decision repeated thousands of times. Recovery isn't dramatic most days, it's repetitive, quiet, ordinary, and somehow that makes it more impressive. Marcus rarely discussed it anymore. The absence of discussion actually reassured me, because recovery had become part of his life rather than the center of it. The distinction mattered a great deal. One evening, several weeks before graduation, our son came home for a visit. The conversation drifted naturally toward the future: career plans, graduate school possibilities, job opportunities, dreams, goals, the same topics families discuss when possibilities expand. At one point, he looked around the dinner table and smiled. "You know what's funny?" I asked what. He leaned back, thinking, then answered, "I used to think success meant never having problems." The statement surprised me because it sounded older than his years, wiser, more experienced. He continued, "Now I think success is getting through problems without letting them define you." The room became quiet, very quiet, because everyone at the table understood exactly what he meant, not only academically, personally, emotionally, as a family. The insight felt profound and earned. Marcus looked down at his plate, not from shame, from emotion. I could see it, the realization that despite everything, his son had learned resilience instead of bitterness. The outcome wasn't guaranteed, far from it, yet somehow it happened. The thought affected us all. After dinner, as dishes were cleared and conversations drifted toward ordinary topics, I found myself watching the two of them, father and son, talking, laughing, existing in a relationship that had survived something serious, not unchanged, but alive. The sight filled me with gratitude, because reconciliation isn't automatic, neither is healing. Both require effort from everyone involved. The realization stayed with me long after the evening ended, and later that night, as I reviewed graduation details one final time, another thought emerged. The account balance that once seemed like the most important number in our lives had become irrelevant, not because money stopped mattering, because something more important had emerged, the future itself. And for the first time in years, that future looked bright. Graduation weekend arrived with surprising speed. Years often feel long while you're living them, then suddenly they appear short when viewed in hindsight. Standing in the hotel lobby the evening before the ceremony, I couldn't stop thinking about that. The years of preparation, the years of sacrifice, the years of uncertainty, all of it had led here, to this moment, to this milestone, to prove that perseverance can outlast adversity. The realization felt almost overwhelming. Families filled the hotel, parents carrying garment bags, grandparents taking photographs, students moving between celebrations and final obligations. The atmosphere radiated accomplishment, hope, possibility, everything a graduation should represent. Watching it all unfold, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not because the journey had been easy, because it hadn't, because despite the difficulties, we had arrived, and arrival matters a great deal. The next morning began early, very early, the kind of morning where excitement replaces sleep. I stood by the hotel window drinking coffee and watching the campus slowly come alive. The sunlight spread across buildings, students crossed walkways, families gathered. The entire scene felt symbolic, a community celebrating effort, celebrating achievement, celebrating futures. I found myself smiling, something that would have seemed impossible years earlier, not because the pain had disappeared, because perspective had grown larger than the pain. The distinction mattered. Around mid-morning, we made our way toward the ceremony venue. Crowds filled every pathway, thousands of people moving in the same direction, different stories, different backgrounds, different challenges, yet all connected by a common purpose. The atmosphere was electric. Marcus walked beside me quietly, not withdrawn, reflective. His expression carried something I hadn't seen in a long time: peace. Not complete peace, perhaps that never fully arrives after certain mistakes, but a version of it, a hard-earned version, the kind built through accountability rather than avoidance. The realization surprised me and pleased me more than I expected. Inside the venue, we found our seats. The rows stretched endlessly, families chatting excitedly, programs rustling, cameras ready. Everywhere I looked, people were preparing to witness a milestone. The energy felt contagious. For a few moments, I allowed myself to simply enjoy it. No financial calculations, no legal concerns, no recovery discussions. Just pride. Pure parental pride. The ceremony began. Speeches, applause, traditions, all the familiar elements, yet somehow everything felt more meaningful, because meaning often increases when something nearly disappears. The lesson felt obvious and powerful. Then came the moment every parent waits for, the moment every student earns. Names began being announced, one after another, rows moving steadily forward. The anticipation built naturally. Then I heard it, my son's name, clear, strong, official. For a brief second, everything else disappeared. The crowd, the noise, the venue, all of it faded into the background. Only one image remained, my son walking across the stage, confident, cap and gown, future waiting. The sight brought tears immediately, not dramatic tears, quiet ones, the kind that arrive when gratitude becomes too large for words. I didn't try to stop them. There was no reason to. Beside me, Marcus wiped his eyes too. The gesture was subtle, yet unmistakable, and suddenly I remembered the night he confessed, the account statement, the missing money, the fear, the uncertainty, the devastation. The contrast between then and now felt almost impossible to comprehend. Yet here we were. Reality often surprises us that way. Our son accepted his diploma, shook hands, smiled, then continued across the stage toward the future he'd earned, the future we'd nearly lost. The realization hit me with unexpected force, not because the danger remained, because it didn't, because the danger had passed. The threat no longer controlled the story. Determination did, hard work did, resilience did. The understanding filled me with profound relief. After the ceremony, families gathered everywhere. Photographs, celebrations, hugs, laughter. The campus transformed into a festival of accomplishment. We eventually found our son near one of the main courtyards. The moment he saw us, his face lit up. The same smile he'd worn as a child, the same smile he'd worn when he earned the scholarship. Some expressions never change. Thank goodness. The three of us embraced. A simple family moment, yet one carrying years of history, years of challenge, years of growth. As cameras clicked and relatives celebrated around us, I found myself studying Marcus, not critically, not suspiciously, simply observing. And what I saw surprised me. For the first time in a very long while, he wasn't looking backwards. He wasn't trapped in guilt or shame or regret. He was present, fully present. The realization felt important because recovery isn't only about avoiding destruction, it's about returning to life, returning to moments that matter, returning to people that matter. Marcus appeared to understand that now, perhaps better than ever. Later that afternoon, after countless photographs and conversations, our son pulled us aside. His expression looked thoughtful, almost emotional. Then he said something I will never forget, something that captured the entire journey more perfectly than any speech ever could. I know things weren't easy. The statement immediately quieted everyone. He continued, "And I know all of us had to work harder than we expected." A pause, a smile, then, "But we made it." 3 simple words. We made it. Not I made it, not you made it, we made it. The phrase carried years of struggle inside it, years of effort, years of healing, years of perseverance. And standing there on a crowded campus surrounded by possibility, I realized something. The diploma represented achievement, but those 3 words represented victory, a very different kind of victory, one measured not by grades or scholarships, but by resilience. And resilience had carried us farther than money ever could. After graduation, life entered another transition, a quieter one. Less ceremonial, but no less significant, because milestones are strange things. People spend years preparing for them, then they pass in a single afternoon. The celebration ends, the photographs are uploaded, the hotel rooms are checked out, and suddenly, ordinary life returns. Only it isn't quite the same life anymore. Something has changed. Something has been completed. The weeks after graduation felt exactly like that. A chapter had closed, a successful chapter, yet the story continued. Our son began interviewing for positions connected to his field of study. The process was exciting and stressful. The combination seemed unavoidable. Applications, interviews, follow-up calls, waiting, so much waiting. Watching him navigate the process reminded me of something important. Success doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It simply creates new opportunities to face it. The realization felt oddly comforting because uncertainty had once terrified me. Now it felt familiar, manageable, a normal part of growth. One afternoon, several months after graduation, our son called unexpectedly. His excitement was obvious immediately. Before he even finished saying hello, I knew something good had happened. Parents develop that instinct, the ability to recognize joy through a phone line, the ability to recognize disappointment, too. This was definitely joy. He received a job offer. An excellent one, the kind opportunity people hope for after years of hard work, the kind opportunity we'd dreamed about when he was still a child, the kind opportunity that once seemed endangered. The realization hit me immediately. A future, a real future, standing on its own, independent, earned, secure. I listened while he described the position, the responsibilities, the location, the possibilities. Every sentence felt like a reward, not because success guarantees happiness, because opportunity creates choice, and choice was exactly what we'd spent years trying to protect. After the call ended, I sat quietly in the kitchen, smiling, thinking, remembering. Marcus walked in a few minutes later. One look at my face told him something had happened. Good news? I nodded, then shared everything. The job offer, the details, the excitement. Marcus listened carefully, then sat down, silent. For a long moment, he simply stared at the table. Finally, he spoke. He's going to be okay. The statement sounded simple, yet it carried enormous weight, because hidden inside those words was another sentence, the sentence he'd feared for years. I almost prevented that. The thought remained unspoken, yet present, very present. I understood, perhaps because I'd carried similar fears, not about causing the damage, about repairing it. Would our efforts be enough? Would the rebuilding matter? Would the future survive? Now we had our answer. Yes. The relief felt profound. The following months brought more changes, new routines, new goals, new possibilities. Life continued moving forward, as life always does. The gambling crisis gradually became something different, not forgotten, never forgotten, integrated, part of our history rather than the center of it. The distinction mattered a great deal. One evening, while sorting old financial records, I found the original scholarship letter, the same letter we celebrated years earlier, the same letter that marked the beginning of so many hopes. I sat down and read it again, slowly, carefully. The words hadn't changed, yet my understanding of them had. Originally, the scholarship represented achievement. Now it represented something else too, resilience. Because achievement earned the opportunity, resilience protected it. Both mattered. The insight stayed with me, growing stronger over time. A few weeks later, Marcus and I attended a financial literacy seminar. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Years earlier, neither of us would have imagined attending voluntarily. Now it felt important, necessary even. The experience proved surprisingly valuable, not because the information was revolutionary, because perspective had changed. We listened differently, paid attention differently, understood risk differently. Pain often teaches lessons success never does, expensive lessons, unwelcome lessons, yet lessons nonetheless. Driving home afterward, Marcus said something unexpected. I used to think money problems were about money. I glanced at him, curious. He continued, they're really about decisions. The statement lingered, thoughtful, accurate, because the missing money had never been the whole story. The real story involved choices, secrecy, avoidance, responsibility, trust. Money simply made those things visible. The realization felt important, very important. Months passed, then more months. Life settled into a rhythm, a healthier rhythm. Not perfect. No family achieves perfection, but honest. And honesty creates stability in ways deception never can. One Saturday morning, while drinking coffee on the back patio, I found myself thinking about the education account, the account that once defined every financial goal, the account that nearly broke our family, the account that ultimately taught us more than we ever wanted to learn. Surprisingly, the memory no longer filled me with anger or grief or even regret. It filled me with perspective, because the account represented both our worst moment and our turning point, the destruction and the rebuilding, the loss and the recovery. The two realities existed side by side. The contradiction felt strangely beautiful because it reflected life accurately. Most meaningful stories contain both pain and growth, both failure and redemption, both loss and hope. Ours was no exception. And as I sat there watching the morning sunlight spread across the yard, I realized something. The scholarship money had funded an education, just not the education any of us expected, because in the end, all of us learned something about addiction, about trust, about resilience, about responsibility. Lessons worth far more than a balance statement could ever measure.
5 years passed. The speed of it surprised me, perhaps because difficult years feel slow while you're living them. Then suddenly they become memories, evidence of how much life can change and how much people can change too. By then, our son had built a successful career, not overnight, not effortlessly, through the same qualities that earned his scholarship in the first place: discipline, persistence, commitment. The trades had carried him through college, then through adulthood. Watching it happen remained one of the greatest privileges of my life, because parents spend years imagining their children's futures, then one day those futures become real. The transition never feeling remarkable. Our relationship with Marcus had evolved as well, slowly, carefully, honestly. Trust had not returned all at once. It couldn't. The damage was too significant, too personal, too expensive. Trust returned the same way it had been lost, one choice at a time. The difference was direction. Years earlier, repeated choices destroyed confidence. Now, repeated choices rebuilt it. The process took longer than anyone preferred, yet it worked, eventually.
The lesson stayed with me because trust isn't restored through promises, it's restored through evidence, consistent evidence. Marcus understood that now, far better than before. One afternoon, while organizing old files, I found the account statements again, the same statements that once made my hands shake, the same statements that revealed everything. For a moment, I sat quietly looking through them, the withdrawals, the dates, the amounts, the evidence of a family crisis. Years earlier, the documents felt overwhelming. Now they felt different, not harmless, not pleasant, historical. The distinction mattered. History influences us. It doesn't have to control us. The realization felt surprisingly freeing. I placed the papers back into their folder, then continued organizing. No tears, no anger, just perspective. Growth often arrives so gradually that we don't notice it until moments like that, moments when old pain no longer holds the same power. The realization felt meaningful, a sign of healing, a genuine one. Later that year, our son invited us to a professional awards banquet. The invitation itself felt surreal. The little boy who once built science fair projects at the kitchen table now received recognition in his career. Life moves quickly, sometimes painfully quickly. The event took place in a large hotel ballroom, elegant, formal, filled with accomplished people. The atmosphere radiated success, not flashy success, earned success. The distinction mattered very much. During the ceremony, several individuals were recognized for excellence in their field. Eventually, our son's name was called. The applause filled the room. Proud applause, well-deserved applause. I felt the same surge of emotion I'd experienced at graduation, perhaps stronger, because now there was distance, perspective, proof. This wasn't potential anymore. It was reality. The future we'd worried about had arrived, and it was thriving. After the ceremony, people gathered for photographs and conversation. At one point, I watched Marcus speaking with our son near the edge of the ballroom, both smiling, both relaxed. The sight affected me more than expected, because years earlier, I wasn't sure moments like that would exist. Not because of money, because of trust. Trust is far harder to rebuild. The fact that they stood there together represented something significant, something earned. The realization filled me with gratitude, not because everything worked out perfectly, because people chose growth instead of surrender. The distinction is important, very important. Later that evening, while driving home, Marcus said something unexpected. I still think about it. I knew immediately what he meant. The money, the account, the choices, the consequences. Some experiences never fully disappear, nor should they. I waited, letting him continue. I think about how close I came to losing everything. His voice sounded calm, reflective, not consumed by shame, not trapped by guilt, simply honest. The distinction mattered a great deal. After a moment, I answered, "You did lose something." Marcus nodded, slowly, understanding. Trust, security, certainty, those losses were real. The fact that healing occurred afterward didn't erase them, nor should it. Healing isn't amnesia, it's progress. The distinction felt important, and judging by Marcus's expression, he understood. For a while, neither of us spoke. The road stretched quietly ahead, darkness beyond the headlights. Then another realization settled over me, one I hadn't fully appreciated before. The gambling crisis changed our family, permanently. Yet permanent change isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's education. Painful education, expensive education, unwanted education, yet education nonetheless. We learned things we otherwise never would have learned, about addiction, about accountability, about resilience, about ourselves. The lessons came at a terrible cost, yet they remained valuable. The contradiction felt uncomfortable and true. By the time we arrived home, I felt unexpectedly peaceful, not because the past had disappeared, because the past finally occupied its proper place, behind us. Influential, important, but behind us. And standing in the driveway beneath a quiet night sky, I realized something. For years, I'd measured recovery by what we regained, the money, the opportunities, the stability, but perhaps the better measure was what we refused to lose, our future, our determination, our capacity to keep moving forward. Those things survived, and survival, I was beginning to understand, can be its own kind of victory.
10 years later, I still remember the Tuesday morning when I logged into the education account. Not because I want to, because some moments permanently divide life into before and after. That morning was one of them. Before the discovery, after the discovery. Before the truth, after the truth. The line remains clear, even now. Time softens many things. It doesn't erase significance. Looking back, I sometimes think about the account itself, the numbers, the statements, the balance that once seemed to represent everything. At the time, losing the money felt catastrophic, and in many ways it was. Years of sacrifice disappeared, years of planning vanished, years of certainty collapsed. The pain was real, the consequences were real. Nothing about that should be minimized. Yet perspective changes with time, and time eventually revealed something important. The account was never the most valuable thing we were protecting. The future was. The account supported the future. It wasn't the future itself. That distinction took me years to fully understand, but once I did, everything looked different. Our son built a life filled with opportunity, not because circumstances were perfect, because he refused to let imperfection define him. The scholarship opened doors. His determination carried him through them. Watching that happen remains one of the greatest joys of my life, not because success impresses me, because resilience does. And resilience was everywhere in his story. Everywhere. Marcus's story looked different. Recovery continued. Year after year, choice after choice. The dramatic moments ended long ago. What remained was consistency, honesty, accountability, the ordinary behaviors that rebuild lives. People often imagine redemption as a dramatic event, a breakthrough, a revelation, a single transformative moment. In reality, redemption usually looks much smaller and much harder. It looks like thousands of responsible decisions made when nobody's watching. Marcus eventually understood that. Perhaps that understanding became his greatest achievement. Not perfection, responsibility. The distinction matters a great deal. As for me, people sometimes ask whether I ever truly forgave him. The question is complicated, not because I don't know the answer, because people often misunderstand forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't pretending something didn't happen. It isn't excusing behavior. It isn't forgetting consequences. Forgiveness is refusing to let the past control your future. At least that's what it became for me. The day I stopped carrying constant anger wasn't the day Marcus changed. It was the day I changed. The day I realized my peace didn't belong to him. It belonged to me. That realization was liberating, profoundly liberating. Today, the old account statements remain stored in a filing cabinet, not because I revisit them often, because they tell a story. A painful story, an important story, a story worth remembering, not as a monument to failure, as a reminder of resilience. The documents represent the worst financial betrayal our family ever experienced. They also represent the moment rebuilding began, the moment truth entered the room, the moment reality replaced illusion. Without that discovery, nothing else would have been possible. The healing, the recovery, the growth, the future.
Sometimes the most painful truth becomes the most important truth. Our experience taught me that. One ordinary Tuesday morning, one account balance, one devastating discovery, and ultimately, one extraordinary lesson. Money matters. Of course it does. Opportunity matters, security matters, planning matters. All of those things are important, but character matters more. Integrity matters more. Responsibility matters more. Because money can disappear, accounts can be drained, plans can collapse. Character remains, or it doesn't, and that difference determines far more than any balance statement ever will. When I think about the scholarship fund now, I don't think about the money Marcus lost. I think about the future he almost lost, the future our son ultimately claimed anyway, through hard work, through perseverance, through resilience, the qualities that no gambling addiction could ever steal. Marcus gambled away $200,000, a devastating loss, a painful loss, a completely avoidable loss. But in the end, the most valuable thing in that account survived: hope. And hope, unlike money, grows stronger when people choose not to surrender. If there's one lesson I hope people take from my story, it's this: protect your finances. Pay attention to warning signs. Ask difficult questions, but most importantly, never confuse a setback with an ending, because sometimes the future survives things that should have destroyed it. Ours did. And standing at my son's graduation all those years ago, watching him accept the opportunities he had earned, I finally understood something. Marcus had lost money, he had lost trust, he had lost years of credibility, but the future? The future belonged to our son, and no jackpot in the world could ever buy that back. If you learned something from my story, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful true life stories, and leave a comment below sharing where you're watching from and what lesson resonated most with you.